Hello, welcome everybody. This event is sponsored by MAP and co-sponsored by Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota. And at this time, I would like to invite Terry Burke from MAP to say a few welcome words.
Thank you, Kathya. MAP is really honored tonight to host this event with Citizens for Global Solutions. And I really appreciate you and Jared taking the time from, I know, very busy schedules to do tonight's event. MAP has done a couple of forums on Ukraine, and we've hosted events with teenagers from Ukraine. Well, right now, much of the media is focused on the wars in the Middle East. The tragedy continues in Ukraine, and we think it's really important that people still keep Ukraine in their minds. Thank you, Kathya and Jared.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you so much, Terry and MAP, for organizing this event. We are very happy today to host Jared, and I would like to introduce him to everybody. Jared Goyette is a freelance journalist who is based in Minneapolis, or has been based in Minneapolis for over 8 years. He has worked for Fox 9 and WCCO Radio locally and contributed to The World, The Guardian, the Washington Post. In 2020, while covering the George Floyd protests, Jared was injured by rubber bullets and successfully sued the Minneapolis Police Department. He's going to talk about this tonight. He has lived in Ukraine, Kyiv, for some months, going back and forth. He volunteers for Chytomo, a media organization that supports Ukrainian culture during the war. And he's going to be talking with us about the life in Kyiv, how people are coping, and the importance of Ukrainian culture during the war. Jared, thank you so much for your time, for being willing to talk to us and have this honest conversation about what's happening in Ukraine right now.
Thank you. Just like as an initial disclaimer, I think it's it's like I'm happy to be here. Like I think I guess I'm not used to being events like this, but part of what the reason that I do what I do is to amplify Ukrainian voices, right? That's most of what I do. But I think at the same time, it's important to, especially at this point, when things in Ukraine are frankly looking a little bit bleak at times, and what happens in the U.S. is really fundamental to what's going to happen in Ukraine and what's going to happen to Ukrainians. That it's important to do whatever I can to sort of share that story and to help people get on the same road to getting to know more. Because at the end of the day, like I'm a guest in the Ukraine house, and people asking me to say, "Hey, what's this house like you're a guest in?" I said, "Well, I've only been here for a little bit. I can only give you what I know and what I've experienced, but I'm hoping that inspires some curiosity for people that may want to know more. And I've plenty of resources I can point people in the right direction." And hopefully there's there might be some people, Ukrainians in the audience who have more to add, and I welcome that.
Thank you. Well, I have a few questions for you, and I'm sure the audience will have too. So I invite anybody in this event to post their questions in the chat, and I'm happy to read them to our guest, Jared. So I will start. Jared, first of all, I would like to know, how did you decide? Of course, I know you were a journalist. How did you decide to go to Ukraine? And can you speak about your personal journey into working in Ukraine as a topic, how it evolved to this present day?
Yeah.
And also, I know that you have been going back and forth, so if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think it's a very slow and gradual process. in some ways. It begins at the start of the war, which is 2014. I think I am a person that as anyone knows me, like some people in the audience, follows mass movements, follows mass protests as they happen. So I followed the Orange Revolution when that happened, but first time I started to work on Ukraine stuff was in 2014. That was was Maidan. And at that point I had kind of had a niche for myself in terms of following these protests, the Arab Spring and others that were occurring across the globe. So when that happens, I kind of knew the drill in terms of being able to quickly identify people that could talk to media. And now at the time I was working for Univision, or an English spin-off of Univision called Fusion. Essentially, there was Univision, and we split the newsroom in two, the English side, Spanish side, and we just worked bilingually. And I was kind of like the protest guru, if you were, or like the social media person that would connect. And in that instance, it was connecting Jorge Ramos' show to people on the ground in Kyiv. And what that meant is that I was researching what was happening. I was finding people to talk to, interviewing them, both to get a sense of what was happening and to find people who would be good on TV and good in English to talk to Jorge Ramos. So I started to do that, and there was a period where things intensified, where it became like a daily exercise of finding young people, because they're predominantly young, and then setting up the interviews. And that was educational. I was moved by their stories, and there was, I think, one, and then sort of the dramatic turn that took was the sort of pivotal moment of unfortunately the sniper attack on that protest crowd, and that left a mark on me, because that was a day when snipers on a hill above where the protests were gathered fired on the crowd, and for me that was people that I'd been talking to, people that I'd been organizing these interviews with, and you can't help but, as you see that unfold in a real sort of live way, is someone I know going to be hurt? They weren't, but I think I think over 100 people lost their lives during the course of that movement, and just seeing that unfold live definitely left a strong mark on me. It's something that you kind of don't forget. So that's sort of like part one. Part two is I like a lot of people didn't and I'm not going to give a whole breakdown of the Ukrainian conflict. I'm not a historian. I'm not a political science person, but at that point, this Maidan, there's a Russian backed and Russian led separatists break from the country. They annex Crimea. A conflict breaks out. I didn't follow it day in and day out as that unfolded, like the way I did in Maidan. When the full-scale invasion happened, I, like a lot of people, was wondering what I could do, how I could engage. And for me, that was like, well, how can I help journalists and writers? I was interested in press freedoms, press protection, and just thinking that's that's maybe somewhere where I could connect personally. And I think I was influenced by the fact that I couldn't really talk a lot of those issues locally, because my feed was being watched and used in court, because I was in this court case. So I was like, well, if I can't do it locally, I'll do it here. And that's how I found Chytomo, because they had these interviews with writers and journalists at the front who were either volunteers or soldiers. And the way they described their reality, the way they described what they were fighting for, the way they described their anguish, their loss, their fears, their frustrations, was deeper and more nuanced than anything I was reading in Western media. And to me, that was like, well, okay, these are people I want to ally with because I think they have really valuable voices. And I could tell like there was translated in English, but it wasn't translated quite there was like some quirks in the translations where you could tell that maybe it just could use a polish. And I offered to do that. And they said, sure. And first they sent me a little, and then they liked what I did, and then they sent me more, and then they sent me more. And I get to know the staff. I become part of their team. And, over the course of a year, it got to the point where I was doing this as another job, editing these translations for the most part. And with every translation, first of all, two things are happening. Like with every translation, I'm learning more. I'm hearing from writers. I'm hearing from historians. I'm hearing and I'm just editing, but I can't help but be affected by what I'm taking in. And at the same time, I'm getting to know the staff there, and I'm becoming more a part of how they operate. And it got to the point where they got I guess it got to the point where they could offer a stipend, and I decided to take it. I decided, I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to do this because it's meaningful, and I had a clear goal.
Yeah, that's
So
yeah.
And there's more details to say, but that's the general trajectory.
Okay, well, we'll be back on that. So I wanted to know more. Who are these Ukrainian writers, activists, the poets, the historians who influenced you along the way and helped you to learn and see this anti-colonial struggle? Can you tell more about this entire process and how you met all of those people? Maybe you have some examples that are worth mentioning.
Yeah, I think, let's see, I can send to everyone in the meeting too, right? Yeah. So that's like a good first step. Or you could look at things like the executed Renaissance. Like I knew, I got the basic idea from Maidan. Okay, they are. If you talk to a lot of people at Maidan, it was a very familiar and easy narrative to understand. These were young people who wanted to live in a different kind of society than perhaps their grandparents had. They were attracted by the idea of being closer to Europe, and the opportunities that represented for the kinds of lives they wanted to live. And you encounter very similar stories in that region of the world, and it was easy to understand. I think what working with Chytomo brought me deeper to understand how Russia at various stages in its history had oppressed and exploited the region of Ukraine, both vis-a-vis the Russian Empire and then vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. You see this in the sort of systematic oppression of the Ukrainian language, and you see it in the systematic imprisonment and execution of leading Ukrainian writers and intellectuals. It is a long and it is a sad story, but it tells itself. In terms of, if you look at the executed Renaissance, if you look at the laws that were passed to restrict Ukrainian and try to end it as a language, or if you look at the history of Ukrainian literature, where at some points it stops because the people promulgating it were no longer around. It becomes very clear. It's a story that I'm still trying to understand. And of course, if you want a guide to a beginner's guide to the history of Ukraine, there's a Ukrainian writer that's really well known for that. It's the Gates of Europe. is usually a good is usually like a good place to start for that.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any interesting stories to share about some special people? I'm sure you have plenty stories. Something that marked you profoundly, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. I think yeah, I guess there's a few things I want to get across on that regard. I think I'll start with it's kind of a lighter story at first. Well, I guess starting off, like, it's important to know that Kyiv is under air raid. Kyiv is a relatively safe city. It's in the sense that it's got very robust air defense compared to other parts of Ukraine. And but it's still it's still under air raid sirens, sometimes daily, at least every other day, and there's still always the threat of attack. You learn to know the difference between what a drone attack is and what a missile attack is, or what there's the expression just a MiG, which is like when Russia has just bombers that are there and that could attack, but they just hang in the air and everyone's alert still goes off. But I got to I was interested in how music was functioning in this place at this time, and I found this place called The Crown, which had just opened at the start of the war, which I found interesting, and they were celebrating like their 1-year anniversary. And I went, and what was interesting was the timing, because the day before, so you have these days. We'd had these this weeks of of air raid alerts, and you've heard the classic the classic horn, the classic. You know what it sounds like? Actually, I'm speaking to a Minnesota audience. This is great. It's exactly like the tornado siren, the Wednesday tornado siren in Minneapolis or St. Paul. That exact sound. Except it goes off randomly. Like, I literally was confused the first few times I heard it. I was like, whoa, it's not Wednesday. It's like, it's exact same sound. So you had these weeks of it going off because an attack seemed intimate, but then nothing would happen. But then all of a sudden it did again. There was, after weeks of false alarm, there was a night attack where what first was a few drones turned into waves of drones attack. And some of these, almost all drones are either shot down, but some get through or some crash into buildings and there's fires. And at the time, there was like, oh no, is this like the start of what it was last year when Russia tried to knock out the heat and the electricity, and the attacks were constant. The fear is that at that point, maybe we're going back to last year. Maybe this is the start of the season. That was how one Ukrainian friend put it to me. And at the same time, this venue is having their birthday celebration. So I went. And I just want to so I was doing interviews for research, and I want to share one of them, which is just with a 14-year-old girl named Diana, who was getting into punk. And yeah, I'll do a quick screen. Wait, did I do a share audio? Let me make sure. I'm not sure if I did. Let me make sure. Share sound. Yeah.
Well, literally, like I've been here in Ukraine. I mean,
So she's describing, why she's going to the show now, and she's explaining that she's, that's, I think, good enough intro.
I hadn't gone anywhere since the war started, so I'm just like, I think, addicted to it. I don't know how to say, how to explain it, but actually I don't care much now. So I woke up today at like 5 a.m. Because of the explosions, and I was like, oh, maybe like a train. I saw like that now it's like alarm, and I understood that it is not a train, but well, I was just sitting like in my headphones and not caring about it. Then I just slept well and came here.
How do you consider like music to be like a form of resistance now? Like cultural resistance, at least.
Well, I think that actually our like music area in Ukraine, I mean like punk. Punk in Ukraine is developing now, new bands, so are formed. They're playing. They get some fans, and I think that music is, I think that will never die, and it is quite important thing for me in my life. So it's a big part of my life. I play music, I listen to music. Music connects me with some people, so it is essential for me.
How is it a form of resistance?
Resistance. Huh? I understood what you're talking about. So, some bands are writing about the war, actually, and they are telling about it. They are screaming about it, and I think that it is like powerful. So yeah. Well.
So, sorry if that was a little bit long, but it hits a few notes, to use a music metaphor, that I think are important. One, this is 2 years in. She, like a lot of other people, is just trying to live her life, just trying to go on with her life. She woke up because of explosions, went back to sleep, and that's a reality. But at the same time, 6 people were killed in Kyiv yesterday because of missile attacks. So both of these things are true. Both of the people are trying to move on with their life, but people can also die suddenly with absolutely no warning. But they have found peace with that, so one way or the other. And then if you look, closely at what she's saying, so this is a city that, could be under attack, but she's still going to go to her show, and she's still a teenager, and she's still discovering punk music, and it's everything that means. I think we understand what it means for a teenager to be finding community, finding through music, through punk music, and of course that music is also speaking to the context that they're in, which in the context of Ukrainian means actually we're going to sing in Ukrainian now. Before they may have sung in Russian, but now they're switching to Ukrainian, and that to me, there's an important aspect of that, which is agency. It's not like she's taking control over what she can take control over. I think there's a tendency in the media, understandably, to portray, the idea of Ukrainians are desperate, they need our help, and that's true, they do need our help. But if you look at this story, or look at what she's saying, she's trying to take control over her life in the way that she can, and that's going to the show anyway. And that's true for her as an individual. It's also true for the musicians. They're you know what, we're going to play. We're going to donate some of we're going to donate. And very, very often, these gatherings, they donate the proceeds to defense. And also, like, I think that there's many complex parts about the conflict about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the history of it. But there's one thing that's not, and that's, this is a 14-year-old girl who wants to live her life and doesn't deserve to be under attack from missiles. And, the thing that keeps someone like that safe is air defense. And, right now, is air defense, and part of that, a key part of that is Patriot missile systems. And those, when people say, I can understand to the degree, like the debate about aid for Ukraine or different types of aid for Ukraine, but I find it very hard to understand people that would argue that we shouldn't provide Ukraine with the ability to shoot down missiles that are being aimed at people like her.
Yes. Well, and since you were talking about young people, we have a question from the audience, so I wanted to take the opportunity.
I think
they are asking, and I wonder if you have these numbers, if you know how many young people are there still in Ukraine, and why is it majority of young people? And did many children and elders leave Ukraine? Do you have that information?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
So how many young people are still in Ukraine, if you have that information, and if many children and elders were able to leave Ukraine?
I don't have I don't have statistics off the top of my my hands like that. What I can say is that, well, there's still a lot of kids there. There's some of them are my students. I teach English as a second language, and I have a lot of high school students in my class, and some of them get annoyed when they miss class because of air raids. The presence of children is very visible. I lived in a neighborhood that had a lot of elders because there were a lot of retired people. So my neighbors, I would say that, like, a lot of children have left Ukraine. A lot of elders have not, if that makes sense. And I don't have the statistics on that, but you would see, it's not like an oddity to see children, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Well, you had conversations with Ukrainian soldiers, both in Minnesota and in Ukraine, about why they fight, how they understand their struggle. Can you share what you learned from them?
I think so. Another big, I want to say what I thought I was going to hear, and then how that contrasted with what I heard and what I learned. Of course, another big resource, like if you're looking for introductory level to Ukraine, would be Timothy Snyder. He has an entire YouTube class on Ukraine. That's a great, like, what I like about it is it's about Ukrainian history. It doesn't whitewash it. It dives into the complexities and explains, like, how Ukraine came to be a place where the definition of Ukrainian is about civic identity as opposed to ethnic identity, and that's a key part to understanding Ukraine as a place where it's a pluralistic identity. It's not just ethnic Ukrainians. No, like it's a shared set of values that define Ukrainians. But Timothy Snyder is great as a dive into understanding how Ukrainians see themselves as a nation. He's very popular. He's a rare example of a foreign writer in any context who becomes popular in the place that he's writing about. He's popular among Ukrainians. He's popular among Ukrainian soldiers across the political spectrum, I found, because they identified with how he describes their idea of nationhood. But reading Timothy Snyder, when I expected to talk to Ukrainian soldiers, I expected to talk about this pluralistic idea of nationhood or democracy, and that would come out, but there was something much more basic at stake in the conversations that I had with soldiers, and that's, if you really think about it, like, what are the choices that present them, that they're presented with? Mm-hmm. It's, if living under Russian occupation is a possibility, but with that comes, if you speak Ukrainian, if you've maybe taught Ukrainian, if you've been in the army, if you've been an activist of any kind. When I say activist of any kind, I mean, you could be a gay, if you've been involved in gay rights activity, if you've been involved in environmental activity, if you've had any kind of profile like that, if you're a writer, there's this long list of qualifiers that put you at risk for death or imprisonment, and that's based on their understanding of their own history and their own understanding of what has happened to their compatriots. So for them, it's about survival, is what I'm getting at. It's like they have the choice is either to flee or die, and they are fighting for the first freedom primarily, which is the freedom to exist. And I think I say that because not to downplay democracy or human rights or all these other things, which are part of their value system and what they want, but it's the idea of just pure survival comes through, and yeah, I can share some of the video with Artem Chapai later, where he talks some about that too.
Okay, well, there are quite a few questions in the chat, and also I had some questions also here. So let me give you some of each. One of the audience asks if the people in Ukraine that you talk to, if they see a path to an end the war, and what kind of resolution or resolutions that now seem possible. According to the people you have been talking to.
Yeah, I think we're at a very difficult moment because there was a lot of hope for the Ukrainian counteroffensive in terms of it being a path to an end, in the sense that maybe if they could defeat or deal enough of a blow, it would cause Russia to either withdraw or to want to negotiate. That didn't turn out well. Then we saw, that was the spring. Then we saw in the winter a rush by Russia to go on its own offensive, its winter offensive. And that has been, the disaster in terms of the loss of life and equipment that they've gone through. And I think it's from the Ukrainian, I'll speak first of all from the Ukrainian perspective. Is it's like about holding on until they can like see another ray of light, if that makes sense. It's like we just have to hold on. Is the idea that I get. Speaking very cautiously from my own perspective, well, I will say that there's a lot of people, like, I think if you really press people privately, like, publicly, it's like, we need to retake all our territory. But if privately, people tend to be like, I don't know if we're ever going to get the Donbass back or things like that. But what concerns me is the dynamic. I mean, we had part of what, when people press for peace negotiations, there's a few assumptions behind that. And unfortunately, they were undermined today, again, in the interview that Putin just gave to Tucker Carlson, where he returned to this idea that Ukraine doesn't exist as a place where the Ukrainians who identify as Ukrainians are believing a falsehood. And that's frankly the idea that you want to wipe out someone else's sense of self. Is how genocides happen, and that's very hard to negotiate with. You can't negotiate with that. That would have to not be the goal for there to be any kind of peace. So I don't have an answer to the conflict. My personal belief is that the borders may look different from when the war started, if that's the bargain that Ukrainians decide that they want to make, but they don't actually have a partner that's not a realistic negotiations right now, even that, unfortunately.
Why it's not realistic?
Because the goal is, judging from Putin's own words, from the words of Russian media, that continues to be to eliminate Ukraine as a sovereign state, and that has to change for there to be peace.
Okay. Well, you have been there in Ukraine. Were you in the winter?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So can you tell us, and that has been a question coming all the time. Can you tell what do they do with electricity, gas, and food? How do people get it? And is it enough to everybody? Or some people don't have?
So this winter has not been as bad as the last one. I think when I was there, everyone was like preparing for the onslaught to begin. The winter attacks were going to begin. And so people were, I'm enjoying Ed S's anti-fascist icon there. So people were constantly waiting for this attack to begin, because last year there were shortages of electricity that were pretty pronounced. And my friends would talk about how when the street lights came back on, they celebrated that finally they were working again. But those shortages haven't been consistent this year, like they were in previous years. Last year. What's taken its place is a very difficult to understand. It's kind of mind-boggling, because there'll be an attack, right? They'll attack the electricity, and electricity will go out in one neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And everyone will assume, well, I guess they're going after the electricity again, and we can expect attacks on the other power stations in the days to come. And then there'll be no attacks for 3 days. They'll repair that power station, then a week later, and another attack, and the lights will go off somewhere else, and there'll be deaths, and everyone will expect more, but then it stops. It's almost like it's hard to live in, because everyone is trying to understand why are these attacks happening in the way that they're happening. what is the objective? Is it people associate it with dates on the calendar? Maybe they're trying to mark this anniversary, or maybe it's because Ukraine sank a boat or a ship, so they're trying to send a message by striking apartment buildings. But the reality is that people can't make sense of it because the grid is still up. But what you do see is in Kyiv at least, you see random, horribly destructive losses of life without the systematic loss of services. Now, if you look at like Kherson or Kharkiv, those are places, if a drone is going to attack Kyiv, you're going to get alert on your phone, and you're going to get like 30-minute notice, because that's how long it takes to get there. With missiles, it's less. Sometimes, frankly, the alert goes off after the missiles hit somewhere, but sometimes you get notice that a missile attack might happen. In places like Kherson, like the time between alert and strike is like 30 seconds. So it's a difference of like Kyiv, it being a half hour, and Kherson, it being 30 seconds or less. And those cities are struck on a weekly basis. That's where we see the incredible loss of life happening. That's where we saw French volunteers were trying to evacuate people and were killed last week. It was there, and they're now trying to regulate volunteers better so that they're less likely to be in the line of fire. And then Kharkiv is another one where it's close enough to the front where there's little time to adapt, and Odessa. So Odessa, Kharkiv, Kherson being the worst case, can all be under attack pretty quickly. I want to make sure that I show the art time stuff. Should I do that now or should I hold off?
Yes, you can show now.
Yeah.
Everybody would like it.
Yeah. I'm not, I think if I can do anything of value here, maybe my stories hold some meaning, but like it's to show you more Ukrainian voices. And I think Artem Chapai, that's his, I'll put his Wikipedia link, or maybe you can, look it up, but that's his author name. He's important to me because, he's a progressive. I think like a lot of people in this room, and like a lot of left, I was very clear that I wanted to talk to like people that were coming from the left, that were critical of their own society, that were fighting for the kind of changes that I want to support as a journalist where I'm from. They were doing that in Ukraine. And like a lot of people on the left, he was a peace activist before the invasion. The Commons, like the socialist magazine, they were, pressing for negotiations. They never believed that Russia was going to invade. But when Russia did invade, and when it showed the intent of that invasion through like war crimes and through rhetoric, there was a basic acceptance on the left that we have to fight. And Artem's an almost extreme case of that, because he was the person who translated into Ukrainian Gandhi's writings. He's also the person who translated into Ukrainian Noam Chomsky. So him coming to grips with like he has to join the army was difficult for him. But what I like about him too is that he has a book coming out in English that I recently talked to him about. I'm about to share some of that interview. It's called The Ukraine, and it's a mix of short stories and his travels, where he's going and he's talking to people like as he visits small towns, and what comes out is these wonderful, beautiful like characters, but also the messiness. Like his portrayal of Ukraine isn't. There's this word in Ukrainian that refers to like patriotic kitsch, not quiche is a food, kitsch. Like the idea of like showing these flags. or symbols of Ukraine and loud music. There's a word that's become to describe that. It basically means patriotic corniness. He doesn't, the Ukraine that he portrays is one that's showing that he loves his people, but also he's not afraid to look at its flaws. So he writes about, he's writing about, you see themes of patriarchy, you see themes of class divide, you see all this ugliness that he's trying to describe, but with love for where he's from. So that's who he is as an artist. But when I talked to him last week, I knew that I was going to talk to this group. So I asked him, what would you tell them about why you fight? So this was actually directed to this group. Yeah. Come on. Wait, I'm not screen sharing yet, am I? Let me do that. But I'll sort of split it up to narrate it. What would you say to them on the question of why you fight or why it is you ended up fighting?
To put it very...
And he's at a training facility right now, which is the background.
Stereotypically, that not fighting with the evil is being accomplice with the evil. I was very much, when I decided to go to the army, I wrote a post about it on Instagram, which is in English, and I quoted, I don't remember her given name, but Shakur, she's the aunt of Tupac Shakur, who was in the Black Panthers. And she gave an interview which then became a song by Asian Dub Foundation, the hip hop group Asian Dub Foundation. They remixed it into their song. And it said that being afraid to fight would mean being accomplice to the evil, being together with the evil, and so I have to become a reluctant warrior. You can find the exact quote because just type in Asian Dub Foundation Reluctant Warrior, and there's the exact quote.
And I just put the link to that song in the thing, and he's talking about the god, the great aunt or godmother of Tupac Shakur.
For that. So this is what I was thinking about on the day when I was choosing whether to join the army or not. Even though before that I translated Mahatma Gandhi, and I really believed in trying to be I was an activist for many years, and I always tried to remain non-violent, which I did. I did some violence against the property, but never against people. I never hit a person since I turned 18, I think. On the ground.
So, and I think that his activist life is interesting because he was someone who, studied in the US and was participated in kind of post-Katrina volunteer work and was in protest against deportations. He's someone who was actively against the Iraq War as a Ukrainian in the US. But yeah, let's continue a little.
It doesn't matter a lot. For me, this...
Oh, I asked him about the proxy war argument. What do you say to arguments that this is a proxy war?
It's like talking about chess instead of talking about pawns. And I already addressed this with my argument with Noam Chomsky, whom I translated into Ukrainian. I was very hurt by his stance because he is talking about big political, geopolitical chess. I don't give a damn about geopolitical chess when my kids and my wife have to run away from our home. And I sometimes feel like these people who are dealing in schemes and frameworks in like this big thinking, they just don't feel the anguish of the people on the ground, of the millions that have to run away, of the millions of separated people, separated families. So for me, when I say that, okay, when I hear that, okay, it's Russia fighting for global dominance against the United States and with China, I just feel like I'm very unfortunate that I am part of this, but I cannot make this these thoughts make me run away, because I would feel that I'm addicted. Yeah. In this way, I still feel that I'm an active agent. So yeah, basically, like, these thoughts, they deny agency from Ukrainians. We understand all the geopolitical games very well, but don't exclude us from the equation. We are active agents who are fighting for our own good. And we are the victims, so more than that, we are the unwilling agents.
Yeah.
And if the United States help us in this situation, we are very grateful for that. Which does not deny the fact that in other parts of the country, the United States is an imperialist, well, not imperialist, but the country with imperialist tendencies, right? That the United States was wrong to fight in Vietnam, for example, or in Iraq for that matter. It's my personal opinion. I have to say it again.
He has to be very careful because he's an active duty soldier, so he can only say so much. But like, I hope that gives some notion of how these things are perceived in Ukraine by critical. And Artem is, I think he's representative of a critical group, like dissidents, right? Like, he's someone who's criticized within Ukraine from the right. But I hope that gives some insight.
Yes, it does. Thank you for that. That's a wonderful work that you have been doing in gathering all this different information. Well, I wanted to get back to the war itself, and how it's unfair to ask, but I will. How is the daily life of living under air raids, and how do you think has it been impacting the people's psychological state?
I mean, I'm still learning this. It was one of the hardest parts of adjusting to life in Ukraine, was getting to the, like, there's a funny anecdote about this, which is, like, I talked about, one of the things you have to learn is, like, when and how to take air raids seriously. But the problem with that is, like, what's true one week may not be true the next. It's unnerving, first of all. They hear the tornado sirens go off, especially in the middle of the night. The first time you want to take it absolutely seriously. Okay, air raid siren, I don't want to mess up, gonna go to the metro. And then you realize there's no one in the metro. So you're like, okay, that must not be the serious one. The ones at night,
and for those who don't know yet, can you explain why you go to the metro? For those who didn't hear.
Sorry, the metro is the most common bomb shelter. And speaking in Kyiv, the metro is like, you spend 10 minutes on an escalator going down. Like, it is deep and beautiful. I was enchanted with the Kyiv metro. It's the different stops with, like, they're like almost secular cathedrals. It is a very vast place, and it is safe. And that's where you go to be safe. There's other if you don't have a metro stop, you may have a traditional bomb shelter, but a lot of people go to the metro. I think people, so some people are at the point where they just ignore the attacks, but you're always on guard for like, when is the next big one going to happen? And unfortunately we did see a really big attack this week, where you had, the images of smoking windows from where missiles hit apartment buildings. But yeah, I think it wears on you. There's a constant calculus you're doing of what plans you're going to make. There's a constant calculus of where you're sleeping, like how close. It's two walls. You want to have two walls between yourself and the window, or so a lot of times that means sleeping in the hallway. So like the first stage, you sleep in the hallway. Then if it's going to get really bad, you go to the metro. But you want to make sure that you don't get caught walking to the metro when it's really, really bad. So you got to plan when you're going to leave based on how bad you think it's going to be. And there's all these Telegram channels you're reading to try to get like a read on what's it going to be like. And that becomes obsessive. Like you're trying to get the right information at the right time. And you're also trying to figure out what the pattern is. Like, is the big attack coming next week? Is this drone that's on its way to Kyiv, is that just a stray drone? Or there's going to be 20 behind it, and then 20 behind that, and then 20 behind that. So you're constantly trying to do this math. And I think that just wears on you psychologically, even if you're just going on with your life and proceeding it, you're doing the math, you're doing the calculations. And that does wear on you. I think, and I think that creates a situation where people are like strong on the outside, but a little bit frayed on the inside, and maybe like one step away from being very emotional. It's like people can go from seeming perfectly fine to like, you give them a hug and they kind of collapse a little because they've been holding that tension so long that if they're given the opportunity to express and let that out, it can come out all at once. And maybe they'll go from perfectly fine to crying because they just haven't had the chance to let out that tension. Yeah. I'm sorry that was a little bit rambly, but hopefully it got through something.
Yes, it does. And just for those who are interested, Volodymyr Zelensky gave a great interview last year to David Letterman, and he was inside of the metro exactly for those reasons. Noise and the eternal bombing. So those who are interested, it is on YouTube. Thank you, Jared. So in your viewpoint, how do you think the Ukrainian interpret Russia's intentions based on Russia media, their history, and how do you think that impact how they see the conflict and their choices?
Yeah, I think I alluded to this a little bit.
Don't wanna catch you here, but I am.
No. I think this is a good example. I'm about to put a link in. A thing that I've noticed is that, in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian media sphere, the way Russians talk about them gets a lot more attention than it does here. Like, as in, Ukraine is more in touch with more aware of how they're being portrayed in Russian media, whereas in the US context, Russian media, what's said on a daily basis in talk shows or things like that, doesn't really make headlines. That's not really part of our cultural life. And what's scary for Ukrainians is that a reoccurring theme will be this idea that apparently, I haven't seen the interview with Tucker Carlson, but this reoccurring theme that comes out that in Russian talk shows on Russian state media, that the notion of being Ukrainian is false, and we must either treat people, re-educate them so they do not think this anymore, or eliminate them. And that, that kind of rhetoric, it's not typically put out by, let's say, a government official, but it's said by the more extremists that are on Russian state propaganda, and that Russian state TV, Russian media, so authorized by the government to have a platform. And that kind of language choices really hits home. And if you think about, if you're Ukrainian, how you hear that and how you think what your choices are, it goes back to what he was saying. Either you flee or you fight, or you risk death. And that's I don't think the nature of those choices is well understood, or how the rhetoric coming from state TV in Russia influences how Ukrainians think about it, at least from what I can see.
And on that note, can you talk about a few obvious Russian propaganda stereotypes about Ukraine? We have been discussing this since the beginning of the war, and I feel there is so much disagreement, but you were there. Perhaps you have an insight about it.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I have to apologize. I'm exhausted. It's 2:07 a.m. I'm not gonna be able to go through all of them. I'm sorry if I'm a little bit rambly. The case was resolved. The ACLU case was resolved today. Yeah, but it's been a long day. I also taught and I think a lot of what I'm, part of what I'm doing is informed by journalism, but I also, as a side note, I host English conversation clubs for 6 hours every week with Ukrainians, just getting them to speak English. And, in the course of that, I hear a lot from regular people. Half of them are refugees, half of them are not refugees. And they, what their worries, what their dreams are, it all comes out in these sort of group, it's English class, but sometimes it becomes group therapy as everyone kind of vents while learning a language. And I've also learned a lot from that. But, one stereotype is the whole Nazi, Ukraine's Nazi. And I think, let me say something really basic here, but I really wish that people would internalize it more, particularly on social media, with the way they talk about Ukraine. Ukraine is a whole society. It is a whole freaking country. And within that whole society, think about any society you've ever known or interacted with. There's funny people, there's angry people, there's lazy people, there's hardworking people, there's people that are brave and courageous, there's people that are not brave and courageous, there's people that are left-wing, there's people that are right-wing, there's people that are anarchist punks who have a problem with authority, there's people that are anti-gay, and there's people that are gay rights activists. You can't get my point, right? Like there's it's a big, large, and one thing I love about Ukrainians, which reminds me of where I'm from, Philadelphia, they're also very argumentative. Like they have diverse opinions, and they're not afraid to argue with each other about what they think would be right for their society or their country. So yeah, are there right-wing Ukrainians? Yes. Are there left-wing Ukrainians? Yes. Are they fighting together in the same trench? Absolutely, because they're fighting for that primary freedom, which is before we can figure out what the tax rate is or what even our system of government is, we have to fight for our right to survive. And that's the primary fight right now. Now, I think it is important to mention that, there is a right-wing, a scary right-wing in Ukraine, but they've never, they did not get enough votes to be represented in parliament in Ukraine, which isn't the case for a lot of other countries in Europe, like Germany, like France, like Spain. Like these are countries where the right wing has much more entrenched political power. But we must fight, there's an obligation to fight fascists wherever they are, and they're everywhere. There's not a country where there's not fascists. And that's why I make sure that I'm talking to people but everyone's gonna know their own context best. Right, and that's why I talk to people like Artem, who's a progressive in his own context, and can talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. we have several questions, and I know we want to go through everything. I apologize about that with our audience. Do we have time for a few more before you drop dead, exhausted?
Yeah, and I want to get to Gaza
Yes,
before we
okay,
go.
let's go to Gaza then. It's another horrible, horrible war that I wish that our in this time, in this era, we didn't have to see, and we have. I wonder if you have had the opportunity to talk to people and interview. It is you are in a very interesting position, because you are usually the interviewer, and today we got you to be the interviewee. I wanted to hear a little bit about you reflecting on Ukrainian and Palestinian solidarity and the war in Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think like obviously that's like a part that's important to our time, and I'll get to him. And it's like, I think as like a side note, like my personal reality is interesting because my partner is like one of the lead organizers for the Free Palestine Initiative in Croatia, or one of the larger ones in the Balkans. And the reality that takes place is she spends her day focused on Gaza and organizing around Gaza and doing that. And I'm focused on Ukrainian literature and all that. A lot of times our days are kind of bleak because the news out of both places is really tough right now. And then we sort of get together at night and confer about what happened. So it's kind of it's a weird moment where that's just the duality of the day in and day out for me. I think, but it was important to me, important to other people that there are Ukrainians that did step forward and show support for Gaza, but it's important to understand that happens in the context that I think Ukrainian mainstream media has been slanted in its coverage, just as I would argue that in terms of, when I say slanted in its coverage, I mean slanted in the sense that they were slow to recognize the atrocities that were unfolding. And but to be clear, my position, Hamas, evil, barbaric attack. But what Israel proceeded to do to Gaza has a lot in common with what Russia did to Mariupol. In the sense that you had a densely urban populated area that you shell indiscriminately residential areas, or without any real clear discrimination, to the extent that you cause massive amounts of civilian casualties. And we don't know the death toll in Mariupol well, because the Ukrainians never got a chance to count the dead. But there's the Human Rights Watch came out with a report today that I haven't had a chance to read that sort of tries to analyze the mass graves and see what they can calculate. But anyway, I want to go to Artem because, so it's important to note that like not all of, Ukrainian media isn't the best on this topic. And I also think that there was a desire amongst Ukrainians that Israel would help, and that's a natural thing, right? Israel has a really good air defense system called Iron Dome, right? And people want it so that they can have their kids be safe, right? That's a natural hope. And that hope to get assistance from Israel, I think has slanted how people think about it. But over time, I think the images of the civilian casualties also have resonated in Ukraine and affected how people think about it, particularly young Ukrainians. But I'll put it to Chapai just so you can hear him how he talks about it. Sorry. Here we are. So what I just skipped, by the way, was him saying that for him, his primary reason for fighting is because he wants to be back with his family, right? And when I talked to Ukrainian soldiers in Minnesota, that was a reoccurring thing. I'm fighting for my family. But on the Gaza part, Oh, geez. Is it not sharing?
No.
Oh, why didn't someone say something sooner? Thank you, Maeve. I was, but okay. I apologize, guys.
Yes.
It's
I
been
see.
a long day. It's been a long day.
We see now.
And I thought I was playing. I apologize to everyone. Sorry for taking up your time like that. Let me get there.
Israel for
Now I have to re-get there.
like there's much less very good bands to the majority together in our home and in our city. This is also a matter of principle. Like I wouldn't bend to the majority. I have very good Israeli friends, and I admire how in Israel many more people participate in wars than in Ukraine. Like there's much less draft dodgers or whatever you call them. So I admire Israel for that. I admire Israel for their like will to survive, and I can sympathize with their struggles. However, this doesn't mean that you can kill Palestinian kids, and this is okay because you were attacked first. And here I must stress that this is my personal opinion. It's not like I'm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's like a pretty basic point, and you know, he goes on to say, you know, to agree with the sort of let's see, here we go. With the Mariupol comparison. So, you know, I think there's an important thing to understand. It's difficult to make generalizations, but there is a commonality, which is, you know, there's anti-colonial nature to this, which is, and that does, I'm not trying to like excuse or apologize for Hamas or anything like that, but you know, the idea that, you know, Palestinians deserve their state and nationhood, I think is there's a parallel, and they have not been able to do that. And I think there's a lot of parallels to make with Ukraine. I don't feel like I'm a historian, so I'm not going to try to make those parallels, but I think they're there. And I think that the link that I just put in can make that case in a way better than I could. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm not even going to get sucked into that conversation. But I think it's important to realize that people are thinking this way. And there's an unfortunate tendency in the West, particularly among younger people, to treat this as one Ukrainian writer put it, as kind of like stan culture. Like, you know, if you root for DC, if you like DC comics, you can't like Marvel comics, right? So if you support Palestine, well, that means you have to diminish what Ukrainians are going through, or vice versa, and that's insane. Like, we can recognize you know, we can start with the principle: war crimes are bad, and we can recognize when they're happening, and show and recognize the different types of pain that people go through, and sympathize with them, and think about, you know, that without pitting them against each other. That's the opposite of solidarity, and that's an important principle for me. Yeah.
I see. Well, Jared, that has been amazing. We have so many more questions. I will send those questions to you offline so you can have them. We had many, and so we are not able to ask all of them. If you sent a question that was not answered, please get in contact with us. We'll try our best to follow up. Well, I wanted to thank Minneapolis Alliance of Peacemakers, Terry Burke, for creating this event, making this possible. I want to send a big thank you for Ligia Ferraz, who is helping administer the Zoom and the behind the scenes. Big thank you for you. Thank you all who attended this event. MAP will have this event transcribed and posted on its website shortly. Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota will have also the recording, the video, and all links that were shared during this interview in the website and the YouTube channel shortly. To go to MAP, the address is www.mapm.org, and Citizens for Global Solutions is globalsolutionsmn.org. Jared, Goyette, thank you so very much. It was a pleasure to meet and talk to you. I hope that our paths will cross again. I know they will.
Yeah,
you have the last words. You warned.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I'm tired and I messed up the audio and video thing there at the end, but hopefully you got some of the message. I'm not an expert on Ukraine. I do work with Ukrainians and every day, and they've taught me a lot, and I hope I've relayed some of that today. You know, I respect that people may have different views on the conflict or its history. To some, you know, I have my opinions, but if we could just agree on one thing, which is protect that 14-year-old girl. Like, she doesn't deserve to have missiles aimed at her. She may be brave, right? She may be brave and be like, explosions, I'm going back to sleep, because that's what 14-year-olds do. But let's do what we can as a society to make sure that has the security that she deserves to have.
Yes. Can't say anything else. It's wonderfully put. Thank you so much, Jared, for everything that you have been doing, and keep us posted about your work. Thank you, everybody, and hope to see you soon.